Hello, I'm William Michael of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, and last night I had the opportunity to sit down with my wife and watch all of Matt Walsh's documentary, What is a Woman? I know that it's been popular around social media and people have been talking about it, but I haven't had a chance to really look at it. I've seen clips here and there, but last night Dania and I sat down and watched the whole thing, and I wanted to post uh, a response or follow up to that documentary because I found a number of things interesting in the documentary. Um, I know that some people will watch it. Well, I mean, on opposite sides, just as our society politically is divided into two radically extreme opposites. I know that members of both of those extremes will watch that video and come away with the same thoughts and statements that they already make, regardless of what the video actually contains. The radical liberals will argue that it misrepresents their views, or um, that it actually supports them. The radical conservatives will argue that everything that the liberals say is false and stupid, and they'll just mock their opponents and things like that. But the truth is not so simple. I found that the documentary revealed some helpful things on both sides that I think, if we want to be honest and fair to both sides and judge the issue justly, I think we have to talk about it without the silly political division and actually try to understand what's true, and be able to move forward from what's an amazingly produced video. The quality, it's just a beautiful video. Matt Walsh is really entertaining as usual, but I don't think that the video argues as strongly for the conservative extreme as many will imagine that it does, and that's what I want to talk about. So anyway, my wife and I sat and watched it last night. I would characterize my wife as being more extreme to the right than I am, and so as we watched it, we stopped and talked about a few things. But there are two things that I came away with, two key points in listening to the transgender representatives speaking about their view of things. There were 2 points that I came away with. One of the points was that all of this transgender talk, all of this homosexual talk in our society starts with deviant sexual behavior. And we can get into the reasons why there's an interest in unnatural or deviant sexual behavior, but that's where all of this begins. It all begins with sexual activity that's contrary to nature, that's forbidden by God's commandments, that's not supposed to be a part of our experience, that contradicts our nature. The first point that I came away with was a real clear sense that all of this stuff, all of this transgenderism stuff, which is all related to homosexuality, it all begins with a culture that is promoting deviant sexual behavior. Okay, that's the first thing. And there was one woman, one she was a psychiatrist or a psychologist, I don't remember. She sort of represented the conservative view, and Matt talked to her a few times throughout the course of the video, but she talked about the origin of these ideas in history, and she mentioned two quote unquote researchers who really started to promote these ideas, and both of them were directly engaged or interested in deviant sexual behavior. And so we can see that this whole movement goes back to sexual immorality at its core. Okay? That's where the problem starts. And like I said, this is contrary to nature. St. Paul in Romans chapter 1 tells us that people who practice these things know that they are worthy of divine punishment. They know that they are worthy of death. They know these things are evil and unnatural. Their own conscience testifies within them that these things are evil, and yet they do them anyway. And it says they desire others to do them. They approve of others who do them. It's those two things. And those two key points, I'll get to the second one in a minute. What I want to point out is we don't need Matt Walsh to reveal this to us. This is in the New Testament. Romans chapter 1, the end of the chapter, St. Paul talks about this issue in ancient pagan society. It's very clear. They do these things. They pursue this sexual immorality, this deviant, unnatural behavior. And not only do they do it, but they approve of others who do so. And that leads to the second point. When Matt Walsh is interviewing people on the street, and it's not really fair to make fun of the answers that people give, because we'll find they'll answer most questions with that same kind of confused ignorance, because that's the result of modern education. No one is certain about anything. You could ask them about creation. You could ask them about health and fitness. You can pick any topic, and you'd get the same dumb confusion among American people. So we can't allow that confusion, that inability to answer simple questions, to look like proof that what is a woman is a real controversy, because, like I said, they would answer any question like that. But when he asks them that question, he goes around asking people, what is a woman? And you see them sort of get lost in this backpedaling attempt to carefully think about what they say before they say it, because they know that this is like a booby trap. And you'll hear this thing come up where, this is, if that's your truth, if that's your reality, if that's what you think is right, if that's what makes you happy, you'll hear all of this talk, if that's what makes you happy, if that's your truth, if that's what you think is right, and so on. And you see that this is the second crucial point in this situation. It's this being trained to mind your own business. That's how I would summarize it. Mind your own business. People are doing evil things, and you know what the right thing for you to do is? Mind your own business. Don't ask questions. Don't reason. Don't raise objections. Don't criticize. Don't judge. Mind your own business. Mind your own business. And if you don't mind your own business, you're a jerk. And that's the idea. Pursuing deviant sexual behavior, whether it's homosexual behavior, whether it's pedophilia, adults with children, or any other wackiness. That's where it starts. And then the second thing is, the world needs to be told to mind its own business. Everyone else needs to be told to leave these people alone and mind your own business. Let them do what they want to do. It's none of your business. So those were the two key points that I took away from it. When I was listening to people talk, listening to the representatives of transgender thought in their interviews with Matt Walsh, and when he went out on the streets and asked people questions, it's those 2 points that are like the core themes of this whole movement in our society. It's that there are people interested in deviant sexual behavior, and what they're going to do is try and force other people to believe that it's right for everyone to just mind their own business and look away. Don't pay attention. And of course, as that happens, those people who are interested in deviant behavior will be free to pursue increasingly worse and more insane behavior and that's what they desire. But like I said, this goes back to Romans chapter 1. This isn't something new that we need some clever blogger to discover. This is ancient Christian teaching. This is Biblical Studies 101, the book of Romans, Romans chapter 1. If you go and read it, start at verse 18 or so and read to the end of the chapter, and you'll see St. Paul explains all of this stuff because this isn't something new. There's nothing new under the sun. This transgender stuff, this homosexual stuff, this is nothing new. This is not some, development or progress that's being brought about by modern technology and advanced scientific understanding. That's just a bunch of baloney. This is a regression. This is a regression back to pre-Christian pagan culture. And it's being presented, of course, through under the disguise of some kind of modern research and discovery. All the people who talk about it are some kind of college professor or psychiatrist or physician or some sort of science-based professional. But it's no such thing. It's not scientific, and it's easy to prove that it's scientific by simply asking for a demonstration, which modern scientists don't even understand. They don't even understand what demonstration is. They simply think that establishing possibility is proof, and that's because they don't study reasoning. So the video was very entertaining, very interesting. I took those two key points away from it, that what the transgender, this whole movement really is it's sexually immoral people pursuing their sexual interests and making it appear selfish and rude for anyone to ask a question, raise an objection, make an argument, rather than just mind their own business. And that's what this movement is about. It's about forcing people in society to ignore what's going on. They don't want our approval. They're not asking us to approve. They're not making arguments and trying to persuade Christians that what they're doing is right. The message is, it's none of your business. Turn around and leave us alone. And the other issue that comes up in the video is the part that nobody talks about is that this deviant behavior, it's presented initially under the guise of being consensual between adults. But that's just where it begins. It begins with this consensual adult activity, and they use that to defend it anytime that it's criticized, that these people love each other, that they're adults, that they consent, they have the right to this and that, it's their body, it's none of your business, nobody tells you what you should do. That's how it's presented, and that's how they basically get people to go away, to look the other way and leave them alone. But the problem is that this deviant behavior, once everyone turns away and agrees to not pay attention, this deviant behavior is not going to stop with simple consensual adult behavior. It's going to get more and more grotesque over time, and it's going to start abusing more and more defenseless, immature, ignorant, weaker, naive people. That's what ultimately they want everyone to look away from. They want us to look away so that this movement can move on to the next phase, which is moving away from consensual adult activity to activity between adults and children or whatever else might go on. That's why this, your truth, your reality, whatever makes you happy, that's why this has to be promoted through the society, because everyone has to get it into their mind that it's simply none of their business, that they don't understand, They can't put themselves in other people's shoes. They have no basis on which to judge any other person. And you have to accept this idea that it's simply not your business, and you need to go back to what you're doing and leave them alone. The problem is what they're doing is going to abuse and harm more and more people who depend on the protection of others. And what people are doing is they're agreeing to relinquish those dependent people, those weaker people, those vulnerable people. We're willing to simply let them go into the hands of these immoral people, telling ourselves that it's none of our business. And we don't have the right to do that any more than they have the right to do what they're doing. I don't have the right to mind my own business. This goes back to Cain and Abel. When God asks Cain, "Where is your brother?" and Abel says, "What, am I my brother's keeper?" Yes, you are. You are your brother's keeper. You're not allowed to just go mind your own business and pretend like, I don't know what my brother's doing. That's none of my business. Why should I have to ask where my brother is? What, am I his keeper? Actually, yes, you are. But we're being taught to think like Cain and say, what do I have to do with any of these kids in my neighborhood? Am I their father? What am I? Am I God? Why do I have to take responsibility for them? And so you can see this movement is trying to persuade people that if they don't look away, they're actually immoral. They're actually selfish, bigoted, arrogant. One referred to them as like dinosaurs. They're confused by ideas that have been proven false by modern science and what we know today and all this kind of stuff. And it's all baloney. It's all baloney. Science is, I've been saying this for 20 years now, modern science is, I believe, the great delusion of the end times. And I'm willing to argue that to my death. It's a complete fraud. No one who uses science to prove things actually proves things. They simply use it to show that something might be possible. And once they have this appearance of possibility, they present it as being demonstrative, and people who don't study reasoning, which is conveniently taken out of all of the science schools, people who don't study reasoning can't understand the difference between possibility and necessity. And they fall for this scientific evidence, which actually cannot demonstrate anything. If you want to learn more about that, sign up for classical reasoning, because you have to learn and understand these things. So those were the two key points I took away. But at the same time, many of the things that the transgender people said, I don't think they were fairly responded to by Matt Walsh. I think sometimes he presented questions and arguments that were pretty weak, and the response of the transgender proponents was reasonable and fair. And I think that transgender people, liberal, moral people watching that video are going to see that. They're going to come away from that saying, it's just, bigoted, unreasonable behavior, because the responses actually were pretty good, and he just ignored the good responses and keyed on the bad responses. And I think that's a weakness of the video. And I'm not going to criticize it, because I make videos. I know how hard even putting together simple classroom videos can be. To look at that production and the work that had to go into that, that's amazing, praiseworthy work. So I'm not being critical or nitpicking. I'm just saying that at the level of ideas, stepping away from that video, and again, the video helps to reveal these things. The responses of the transgender proponents were sometimes reasonable and good. And there, there's one point that we really have to acknowledge is more complicated than we're allowing for. And it's that this distinction between biological sex and gender, that's the key issue in the argument of the transgender people, that your physical biology, which they would refer to as your sex, your physical biology is something different than your gender. And I found this to be a pretty good, pretty clever argument, because what they're saying is your gender has more to do with sort of the social the social reality that you present to others. So, for example, biologically, I'm a male, and that's just a matter of fact. And even the transgender people will acknowledge that they're not debating that. So when people keep saying, if you have, male organs, they already know that. They're already saying that. So repeating that argument as if you're proving something just only proves that you're not listening to what they say. They know that. They acknowledge that. What they're arguing is a little deeper than that. It's more complicated than that. And I think a lot of conservatives are not actually addressing the argument. They're oversimplifying it and then beating up a straw man rather than dealing with the reality. If I were to dress myself up like a woman, if I were to have my hair and nails done like a woman, if I were to wear women's clothing, if I were to cause my body to appear more feminine, like let's say like I wouldn't lift weights, or I would, try to make myself leaner, shave my legs, all these kinds of stereotypical female appearances. If I were to pursue those and present myself as a woman, and I would talk like a woman, act like a woman, participate in what we would consider more, woman-like activities and so on, I would be casting this feminine social influence in my circle, and I could choose to do that. I could choose to act like a woman. It's acting. I could choose to act like a woman and have a feminine influence in the environment where I am. My desk could be decorated like a woman's desk might be decorated. I could talk about topics that a woman might talk about. I could produce, let's say in an office building, I could produce a feminine social influence in the office by choice. And this is what they're really getting at least at the social level. They're saying that just because you're a physical male doesn't mean that you have to play the role of a male. You can play the role of a woman, and you can act like a woman. And not just act in a movie like a woman or in a play like a woman. You can act like a woman in your whole life. You can play the role of a woman. You can play the role of a woman at work. You could play the role of a woman at home. You could play the role of a woman at school, on and on. This is what they're arguing. Just because you were born physically a male doesn't mean that you have to be a male in the play, in the drama of life. You can choose to play the role of a woman. And you see it goes even further. You can choose to play the role of an animal. It's got to do with this choosing a role that you'd like to play in life. And, to be fair, it's not that crazy of an idea, especially when we live in a society that is increasingly disconnected from real life and is wrapped up in, movies and videos and virtual reality and online communications, where we have to ask, like, what does nature and reality actually have to do with many of the interactions that we have? They're virtual. They're artificial. People are acting all the time. We're watching characters all the time. We're watching men pretend that they're superheroes. We're watching men pretend that they're animals. We're watching men pretend that they're robots. We're watching all of these different things, and all of our, constant immersion in entertainment. And then when we go to the supermarket and we see someone acting a role, but it's not on television or in a video, we're now suddenly offended, and we want to know what kind of right do they have to act like a woman at the supermarket. But it would be okay if he acted like a woman in one of our movies we're watching. And so there is this disconnect. Why we're so comfortable in entertainment or what any other circle, and then we're going to be upset when this world of constant acting and virtual reality and role playing suddenly manifests itself outside of our computer screen or television, in the supermarket or at church or in a political office. I think there's something to that argument that the line between reality and virtual reality is being blurred. And we're basically asking, if I can go on the internet and play a role, if I can go in a movie and play a role, why can't I play a role out in the street? And when we say you can't dress up like a woman, you can't play this role in the supermarket or in your house or in the street, when we're asked why not, we say because your biology, that doesn't make any sense. That doesn't make any sense. They're not saying that they're actually women. They're saying that they choose to play the role of a woman. They choose to participate in all of the activities and behavior of women. They choose to have this image, this social influence. It's like acting off stage. It's like acting after the camera stops rolling, continuing to play the role. And it has nothing to do with their biological masculinity or femininity. It's a role. And then when you combine this willingness to play the role of the opposite sex, and then you extend that to the extreme that you're not merely playing this role in a play, but you're going to actually go all the way with this. You're going to actually participate in all of the activities of a woman, which essentially turns into homosexual activity. Now, we see this sort of, fantasy world all of a sudden now mingling with morality and other issues, and these things start to get really confusing. So now we say, well, you can't do that because that's just homosexuality. And they say, well, what if I actually have my biology changed? And that's the next step. So now, instead of having the role that I play in life match my biology, I'm going to start with the role that I play and change my biology to match it. And so now the biological argument is going to go away because they're going to say, whoa, I can change that. I can change that. So if the argument against me playing this role and participating in these activities, if the argument is that my biology doesn't match my activity, I'll just change my biology. So the problem is when Christians take up this biological argument, thinking that they're so clever to say, you have man, you have male genitalia, that's proof that you're a man. That's not actually a good argument, because if that's what it's based on, if that's what the argument's based on, that can be changed. And that's what they're doing. This is what happened with the abortion debate back in the 70s. Christians presented false, not false, but they presented arguments that weren't wise, and they actually created the opportunity for abortion to be legalized. They argued, for example, that abortion is physically dangerous, And so they used this fake argument, and I'll explain what I mean by fake. They used this fake argument that abortion is bad because it's dangerous to oppose abortion. But modern medicine and scientific technology eventually took that risk of danger largely away. And then when the anti-abortion argument was found to depend on this argument that it's dangerous and the danger was removed, the argument failed. And that's one of the reasons why Roe v. Wade was originally successful. We have to be careful that we don't get riled up by these stupid political parties and just start spouting these thoughtless responses, because some of them actually are not good arguments. The argument that you shouldn't act like a woman because you're a biological male is not a good argument, because they can change that, and that's what they're going to do, and you're going to be left with no argument against their behavior. The problem is deeper than that, and even many Christians are afraid to get at the real issue. Many Christians are afraid to get at the real issue in this stuff. So what I want to point out, two key takeaways: sexual deviant behavior. Secondly, the attempt to force other people to look away from this sexually deviant community and mind their own business, to take up the attitude of Cain and say, I'm not my brother's keeper. It's none of my business. This is my reality. This is my truth. This is all I have to worry about. I don't have to know what my neighbors are doing. I don't have to look over there and see what they're doing. All I have to do is stay right here. The attempt to make people think that that's true, that we're not responsible for people around us, is so that the sexual deviant behavior can just run free. And like I said, it may start with consensual adult activity, and we may make the stupid argument that, like, well, it's not consensual, therefore no, sexual activity is not based on consent. And if we make that argument, they'll present a case that appears to solve that argument, but that's not true. It's not based on consent, because it's going to quickly move to other audiences where there can be no adult consent. And that's just the next phase. And as long as you're looking the other way and minding your own business and leaving other people to their own truth and to their own reality, they're going to be free to do those things. And we already see that happening. We already see them moving into schools, and you see all these stories about kids in public libraries being read books by drag queens and all this kind of stuff. You see, they're already moving to that next phase, which is, this is not going to be about adult consensual behavior. This is going to be about complete liberty for sexually deviant people to move on to weaker communities, weaker members of our society, and carry out their Sodom-like lustful insanity wherever they please with greater convenience. And we have to be made to look away so they can do so. But at the same time, I warn Christians that we're not answering the questions rightly. We're ignoring their good responses to our weak arguments. We're pretending that we're defeating them in arguments that we're actually not defeating them in, and we're presenting weak arguments. We're presenting fake arguments that they're going to be able to refute, because we're not addressing the real issue. They're going to be able to refute those issues, and if we make our case, if we get wrapped up in these political movements, like Christians always do, if we abandon our duty to evangelize and focus on the real message, which I'll talk about in a minute, and we allow ourselves to just latch on to these political sound bites that get passed around on the internet and become popular, we're going to present arguments that can be refuted and will be refuted, and those refuted arguments will be what allows changes to be made in our laws and in our communities, because they will actually persuade people that we are the irrational ones and they are the rational ones, and they'll have the arguments to prove it, because our arguments will not be what they should be. And this is what happened to Roe versus Wade back in the 1970s. So what is the real message? What is the real message? First of all, as Christians, we have to realize that these people are trying to return to pre-Christian pagan morality. They're trying to return to a pre-Christian vicious moral culture that allows unrestrained indulgence of lusts. We have to realize that that's where this movement is going. This movement wants to be unbridled. They want to be let loose. And they know what's restraining them. That's why Jesus said, "You are the light of the world. You are the salt of the earth." Christians have that sanctifying influence in the world, that restraining influence. Our government, being influenced by Christian morality and classical virtues, our government restrains their behavior, their desired behavior. And they know that in order for them to gratify their desires, they have to get rid of these laws. They have to change these laws. They have to break free from this classical Christian morality and legal system. They have to shake that thing off in order to be free to do what they want to do. And they know that Christians are restraining them from doing so. So what's going to happen is that if Christians don't have the right responses to these things and don't take the right lines of argument, don't take the right courses of action, but settle for shallow ones that can actually be defeated, Christians are going to lose. Christians are going to lose this political fight, just as they've lost political fights before. And this is going to continue to advance, and more Christians are going to be overwhelmed by it like a wave, and it's going to succeed. And that's why we have to be careful that we're not simply responding to these public arguments, but we're actually working to find the true lines of arguments and the right courses of action for Christians to pursue. So what are they? What are they? Well, it's good for us to go back and look at the book of Romans, where St. Paul addresses this issue. That's why I raised it before. St. Paul explains that this is fundamentally a religious issue. This is not a political issue. This isn't just some people who don't like America or who don't like Western civilization or who are sexually immoral. It's more than that. It's a religious issue. This deviant behavior proceeds from a rejection of God. It proceeds from a denial of the Creator and his authority over our lives for us to do what he wills. That's what ultimately is at stake here. The only solution for it is evangelization. The only right response is evangelization. The work that we're supposed to do is to preach the gospel to these people and pray for their conversion. That what's wrong with their behavior is that it is simply not God's will. That's the truth. It is simply not God's will. It's not what God created men to be or to do. We don't have the authority to play roles. We don't have the authority to choose what character we're going to play in this life. Our responsibility is to fulfill God's will in our life, and the only way that we can do that is if we possess the graces of faith, hope, and charity, which are theological virtues that God has to infuse in us by his own divine power. The means by which he does that is through the work of evangelization and the sacramental life of the church. That's the mission of Christians in the world. It's the only right response to this problem of homosexuality, transgenderism, and so on. these clever political arguments, this like arrogant scoffing at the opponent, pretending that, you have such cute responses to things they say, we're ignoring that some of their answers are actually very good, and they're defeating some of these arguments. We can't just pick and choose what responses we're going to pay attention to. We have to commit ourselves to complete evangelization, not political action. And so to wrap up here, I recommend you take some time to go and read the second half of Romans chapter 1 and realize that the right thing to do, the true Christian response to this, renewal of pagan culture, is to imitate St. Paul. Read what he says, look at his life, and understand what the right Christian response is to these moral problems that we see gaining speed in modern society. I hope that's helpful. God bless.